Hello, this is the third part of my series on Alone in the Dark. If you haven't seen the first two parts, I recommend watching those before you watch this, otherwise you might get a little bit confused. Links are in the description. Anyway, let's have a quick recap of what happened in part 2. This is a nice room. So we hack the pirate to death and it turns out he was guarding a ballroom, as pirates are known to do. My old Indian cover won't save me this time. So yeah, now I'm in some kind of dance hall with these rather inconvenient lava lamp ghosts in my way. And as I've shown before, these lava lamp ghosts are not particularly receptive to my form of ballistic diplomacy. Now, if you've watched parts 1 and 2, you might have noticed that the puzzles I've come across so far are, let's just say, shit. But this puzzle right here, the one you have to do to get the ghosts to leave, is genuinely great. So let's just look at what we've been given visually. We can see there are some ghosts, which are not moving, but are in a dancing pose. They're all clustered together for some reason, and the rest of this room is pretty big. There is a key lying beyond the ghosts. From this visual cue alone, we can immediately tell what our goal is. We have to move the ghosts away from the key, so we don't get destroyed by the lava lamp gods. But I hear you ask, how do you get dancing ghosts to move? Well, in this room there is another clue. In the corner on a table lies a record. So now we can tell, okay, to get these ghosts to move, we must play music. But how do we play music? Well, let's think about the only other place in the game we have seen a ghost. In that room was a gramophone. And during some miscellaneous exploration I was doing earlier, I came across a record called Danse of Death. Now we can put this all together fairly easily and see what we have to do. We put the gramophone down, we play Danse of Death, and bam, the ghosts are moving and we can get the key. This is a top tier puzzle. A+, 10 out of 10, 5 stars. Other good rating, S rank, I don't know. It's just a good puzzle. Unlike the other puzzles we've seen, there's no use of weird, abstract logic to try and solve this one. It's just making great use of visual cues, great use of design consistency, and a healthy dose of player intuition. It's the perfect puzzle. However, I did have to look up the solution to this puzzle. And I'm not particularly proud of that because, you know, logically, when you put it all together, it makes sense. But the reason I had to look up the solution to this was because of the precedent that the game had set for its own puzzles. Let's look at the other ones I've done so far. Make imps stare at themselves until they die. Oppress racial minorities and throw a heavy thing. None of these come close to the quality of this ballroom puzzle. That's like going to a petting zoo where they've got a sick goat, a wounded horse, some plague rats, and Kirathi Galkinor, last of the Serpent Kings. But when you finish this puzzle and you get the key from the ghosts, we now have to say farewell to the Derceto house, for we must now hunt the pirates and cultists of the depths below. So we go down into the depths, we run across a falling bridge, we get chased by a big worm thing, and worst of all, we run into an old foe. No, it's a shoebill! Well, we've already said goodbye to the Derceto house, but we must also say goodbye to Edward Carnby, because the reptile is up to play.
Call me the reptile.
After dispensing some good old-fashioned Louisiana justice onto the shoebill, I come across this dock area which has a, what is that? Let's be optimistic and say that's a deep one, so the game can score a few more Lovecraft points. I'll take this opportunity to talk about something I love to see in games, and that is developers sneakily adding mechanics or attributes to the player without outright telling you about it. A recent example of this is in Red Dead Redemption 2. I won't say what it is specifically for spoiler purposes, but throughout the story of the game, you are sneakily given some effects which they don't outright tell you about until quite far into the game. And I love that. It's a little nod to the more observant players by saying, hey, if you're paying attention, you can notice something before everybody else. And that's cool. Good stuff. This game takes a slightly different approach, because it sneaks you a mechanic that is required to beat the game. It doesn't tell you that you now have a jump button. If you don't look for this jump button, you will not find it, and you will not be able to complete the game. I don't understand why this is a thing. I could have used the jump thing throughout the house. That bit of floor that I fell through once, I could have leapt over that, but no, I didn't have the option. I only have the option when I come across the deep one and kill a shoebill. Anyway, we're doing 3D platforming now, which is exactly what fixed perspective games thrive at. Now that we're on to the platforming maps, I should mention that you can play this game at higher resolutions. I'm playing it at the native one. You can go up to 1920 by 1080, probably even up to 4K, and the game will become a lot more clear, but I wanted that authentic 90s experience. And for the most part, I got that and I enjoyed it. However, it did not come without its problems. When we start to get to these wide open platforming maps, the resolution really starts to punish you, because now I'm just a handful of pixels on the other side of the screen. I can't really tell what direction I'm facing, I can't really tell where I'm going or what I'm doing. And this just tells me that people who played games in the early 90s, goddamn, you guys were hardcore. After going through the platforming nightmare, I find a gem and a book. The gem is required to finish the game, and from what I can tell, I think the developers made it so that you can completely screw yourself over here, because you need the ghost room key to get into this chest, but you can go down to the caverns before you get the ghost key, and if you do that, I don't think you can go back, which means the game just kind of ends for you here. You don't get to finish it. God damn, these developers are ruthless. Now, I might be wrong, there might be some way to backtrack, but from what I can tell, that bridge fell down, and even if there is a way to backtrack, it's not easy going through this platforming bit again. So the book I got alongside the gem says something very interesting, and in fact, it's so interesting I have to retract something I said in the previous episode. In part 2, I said this: we must stop the pirates, or the cultists. It's either pirates or cultists, it's one of the two. Alas, I was wrong, for this book tells me that the main antagonist of the game is not just a pirate, and not just a cultist. He is in fact a pirate cultist. What? Oh, but this is no standard rate pirate cultist. This is a pirate cultist under the servitude of Cthulhu. Goddamn, what a wild experience this game is. And the more observant of you will notice that we're being introduced to the idea of an antagonist quite near the end of the game, and in fact we are about 3 rooms away from the end of the game. Oh, the things I would give to be a fly on the wall on the original story pitch for this game. Now typically, the last room before the final boss fight of a game will be something great. You know, it'll be a challenge making you show off all the skills you've acquired along the way, or it'll be a big exposition and narrative dump, or it'll be a cool set piece for you to experience before going into the climactic moments of the game. But here, I mean, come on, this is Alone in the Dark. You think they're gonna do something standard? Nah, screw that. We're adding 2 new mechanics to the game. This sphere of lighting one, and also top-down camera views, which we've never used before. I genuinely wonder if there are any cliches or tropes that this game meets. Most of this has been so abstract and strange, and in thinking that, I realized something incredible about Alone in the Dark. Most horror games have gameplay that reflects the narrative and the themes set out by the game, and so far I thought Alone in the Dark simply failed to do this. But now I've realized, this game is inspired by H.P. Lovecraft. By being abstract, and by being strange, and by being inconsistent, it perfectly represents the alien atmosphere that H.P. Lovecraft always added to his work. Now, whether or not that was intentional by the developers is irrelevant and also unlikely. And that's because most of the things that I'm saying are strange about this game are based on standards which did not exist at the time. It's just funny to me to see how our perception of the game has changed over time to actually better accommodate it to its narrative and themes. Again, I don't think it was in any way intentional, but to me it's still an amazing aspect of this game, which I certainly did not expect to see going into it. So I finish the maze and end up in the game's final room, which has a tree in it. That's nice. Ah, never mind, it's a pirate cultist tree. It's shooting fireballs at me and it has a pet deep one. You kill the tree and the final boss, which are the same thing, by employing the age-old tactic of just chucking something at it. As soon as we kill the pirate cultist, the caves begin to collapse and we have to flee. We make our way back through the caverns, which are now devoid of any pirate cultist or shoebill influence, and make our way up into the old rat cellar, which is now free of rats. We find ourselves in the main hall of their seto and head towards the main doors, which this time do not devour us. We walk through them, and with that, we have finished Alone in the Dark. Yeah, Carnby, go ahead and do your little happy jumps. You've earned it, buddy. We walk down the house path and step into a car where the driver turns out to be... oh no, he's a skeleton. Yeah, not sure why he's a skeleton though, because he doesn't, like, try to kill us or anything, he just drives off, which is exactly what we wanted our driver to do. So I guess he's just one of the good skeletons. And the game fades to black. In parts 1, 2, and now in part 3 of this series, I've spent most of the time talking about the stranger aspects of the game, or the aspects of the game which I don't so much like. But that doesn't change the fact that, overall, I adore this game. Not only because of the legacy it left behind and the standards that it set for the industry going forward, but also because all of the little oddities and strange quirks that this game has led to it being an extremely fresh experience despite its age. Resident Evil might have been the game that went on to refine this game's formula and really define the survival horror genre, but you can't deny this is where it all began. Having said that, would I say this is a required experience for horror fans? Definitely not. That's not to say this game should be forgotten by any means, definitely not. I think most horror fans should be aware that this game is where it began, but in terms of the narrative and the gameplay, it doesn't offer much. To really hammer this point home, let's take a look at the history of survival horror. Now this will be extremely abridged, but I'm just going to rattle through the main points. Alone in the Dark set the groundwork for games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, which would go on to refine and ultimately define the genre as a whole, as well as set the standards that most other companies would try to emulate past that point. However, with time, horror games started drifting more and more towards action-oriented gameplay. For example, Resident Evil 4 is vastly different to Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3, but critics and fans alike absolutely adored it. And that trend continued with games like Fear and Stalker, which were more or less action games before horror. And that trend would continue up until the early 2010s, when a game would come out about a man trapped within the house of an insane Lovecraftian threat, who would have to delve deep underground and then escape to be able to leave. This is why I don't think Alone in the Dark is required playing for any horror fans. Like I said, the gameplay, whatever, it's not special. The narrative, Amnesia the Dark Descent did it better. Revolutionizing the genre, Amnesia the Dark Descent did the same thing. Be aware that Alone in the Dark is where it began, but by no means feel the need to play it. After Amnesia came out, the action games slowly began to fade out of the horror genre. Sure, you still got Resident Evil 6, but who liked Resident Evil 6? And after that, it was more games like Outlast, Slender, Layers of Fear, Alien Isolation, and many others that I'm not gonna list. And this is where the real importance of Alone in the Dark lies. Yes, it started the survival horror genre, and that's great, but more importantly, it started the first cycle of survival horror. And that cycle lasted about 18 years. And after that, when games started to become more and more action-oriented, Amnesia came along and reset it once again. And I'm sure in 2028 or whenever it's gonna be, another game will come along and reset it once again. Alone in the Dark is in a very privileged position. It will never be irrelevant. Just to prove this, and as a fun little final note for this video, let's take a look at Resident Evil 7, the most recent original installment in the series that was inspired by Alone in the Dark. It begins with our character taking a lengthy drive through the swamplands of rural Louisiana as he makes his way towards an abandoned mansion. Thanks very much for watching. Subscribe if you want to see some more stuff like this, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.